Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of AC Sisterhood Speaks. I am your host, Six Keys, joined by my co host, Lorena.
Hello.
It's been a while since our last episode. Life's been busy for everyone. Lorena started a new job last year at Riot Games. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, maybe?
So I don't have much to say other than, I am currently at Riot now. It did take
Uh,
some time for me to get used to everything, so thank you to everyone for being patient while I kind of got my sort of ducks in a row.
it's pretty exciting to be working in games now, and I hope you're enjoying it there.
Very much.
So we are back, and today we are excited to be joined by the Associate Creative Director of the recently released Assassin's Creed crossover stories, Clemence Nogrix.
Hello everyone. Thank you for having me.
We're pretty excited, especially I think everyone at the Sisterhood has been really excited about the crossover stories with Cassandra and Eivor meeting. So
Pleased to hear that.
a quick note, the first half of our interview mainly concerns Assassin's Creed Odyssey and shouldn't contain too many spoilers, but just in case, here's your friendly warning that we may get into spoiler territory regarding Cassandra's journey. So, how did you get into the games industry, and would you say yours was a traditional career path?
So I would say that I got in the industry like a combination thanks to a hobby and an opportunity. A hobby because, like many, I fell into video games when I was young, in the 90s. So with games such as Jumpstart, Nightlight, Carmen Sandiego, a lot of educational and activity centers that were available either on PC, on Game Boy Color, and some misadventures on PlayStation on Silent Hill while I was 8. But it continued actually a bit later on while I was doing my studies. I didn't intend to end up working for video games, but as you know, growing up, we're highly encouraged to have as many years of experience as our actual age. So the school I was in highly encouraged internships, and one facet of the internship was to have like a gap year, to take a full year off in between your years of studies to have a full year of experience. And so I divided that year in two. And one of them was to discover startups because that was the key word that year to experience. And I was wondering what to do the second half. And I was like, you know what? Let's try something new. I always was interested in video games, and I knew Ubisoft in Paris had a lot of interns, and it was a great opportunity to try it out for 6 months. So I applied, and I ended up working in a marketing department as an assistant brand manager on Assassin's Creed Unity. And so I entered something completely new, which was a new department, a new industry, and a new career. And I haven't left the entertainment since because I had a lot of fun. And so, to answer your second question, is it a traditional career path? I have to say yes and no because um, I like to do the parallel with Ratatouille from Disney. You know, when the chefs explain their past, and I think that's a little bit saying that my path is a bit different because a lot of people in the industry have found their paths end up in the entertainment industry, but they're bringing with them all the uh, all their learnings, and it could be a little bit weird how they got there along the way, but it's super useful in the end. And no, because well, there are career opportunities now that can start in video game schools. So I'm actually fascinated when those two worlds collide. So sorry, it's a long answer, but I hope you get some satisfaction in what I have to say.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, how did you end up in Quebec since you started in France?
So yes, I started in France, and then I finished my studies. I worked for independent studios and escape rooms as well. And my husband worked at Ubisoft as well, and he was used to working for Ubisoft Canada. He would go to Ubisoft Montreal and Ubisoft Quebec. on the Assassin's Creed brand as well. And so at the end of Syndicate, they asked him to come permanently to Ubisoft Quebec. And so we made the move. And I worked for several companies while we were there. And then there was an opening in marketing for Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And so that's how I got into Ubisoft Quebec. And it's been now 4 years.
As a follow-up of sorts, you have a lot of experience as a product manager before switching to a creative director role. When did you know that you wanted to change your career path, and what sort of work went into making the leap?
So, well, thank you for being surprised, and it's an opportunity to give a bit more details. But if you don't mind, I'll give it a little bit more detail on how I see my career, if you don't mind, because well, when I was doing my internships in different companies growing up, it actually became clear to me that in any industry, sorry, that there was a gap of understanding between marketing, business teams, and production R&D and engineering teams. That it's clear that they have different needs and aspirations for products, which is normal. But that they had a very difficult time communicating and understanding each side. So very early on, it became clear to me that I wanted to be that bridge. I had an understanding of marketing and business side, but I was very curious to understand the other. So I did a master's of science degree in innovation and entrepreneurship, not because I wanted to start my own business, but because it was important for me to know how to present and pitch new ideas, but also because the strength of the program was that part of the class was business students and the other part of the class was engineering students. And we would solve cases and do case studies together. And that's what was the strength of that program. And it allowed me to continue that mindset that I had. And then I discovered marketing production. And the strength in my team was that I was curious of how production teams worked, understanding and keeping an eye on the industry and finding a way to help bring marketing teams out of the shadows somehow, and showing the difference between marketing and business teams, how they operate, their strengths and weaknesses. And marketing and production, maybe one other time we'll have an opportunity to discuss this, but it's a bridge itself between production teams and operational and PR teams. So after starting my career in marketing, um, and I worked on Assassin's Creed Odyssey in this post and Immortals Phoenix Rising and both of their post-launch, there came an opportunity at the studio about this new content for the AC brands. And and in some way, and on my career, there was also some sort of I came to a dead end. I felt like I learned what I wanted to learn about um, marketing production, and I felt like I wanted to be challenged creatively. And so it was actually an opportunity because they were looking for someone to take on the creative lead of this content. And because the two games existed in a way, and I was familiar with the brand, and it was like adding a big new quest and new lore. It was right up my alley, and I applied and got the job.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing your background. Like, it's really fascinating to hear how people kind of make those transitions. Like, it sounds like you just want to keep pushing for more, and I really respect that. Moving on to our next question. First, I want to comment that I was surprised and delighted that we received free DLC for both AC Odyssey and Valhalla. What were some of the challenges of bringing new content to an older game like AC Odyssey?
Well, that's actually a very interesting question. Note that the production team was also surprised and delighted when this concept arose, so we were happily on board. Um, there were a few. I think the first one I want to highlight that's maybe not well known is that we developed these crossover stories at the same time. We had part of the team in Quebec working on the Assassin's Creed Odyssey content, and alongside them, the other part of the team was working on Assassin's Creed Valhalla content, and we had transversal leadership to help make sure we could help both teams. And it brought up its challenges because of ways some how some teams work, but in the end, we felt it best to ensure the same quality, the same intention while we were delivering it. However, we do need to keep in mind that Odyssey is 3 years older, and so is so are the softwares associated with it, because of course we continue to evolve. and so we had to balance the knowledge and the expertise between to writing softwares and to um, bug softwares, etc. Sorry, and so that was an interesting challenge there, and um, yeah, I think that was the main one necessarily, but the team understood the assignment and they were communicating beautifully. And something also to keep in mind was that I wouldn't say it was a challenge, but it was a challenge, but I mean we took it gracefully. Is that it was understood by the dev team very early on that it was an opportunity for Ubisoft Quebec to go back into Assassin's Creed Odyssey, to go back to these characters we were familiar with and that we loved, and that we could go back and tell new stories with them. But seeing as the crossover stories content was led by Ubisoft Quebec, it was clear for the team that Ubisoft Montreal was leading Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and that we were guests in a way into their game and their world. And the team in charge of the post-launch content was simply amazing. Jose, Bruno, and the rest of the team made sure we felt welcome, and they gave us all the information that we needed to catch up in a way to make sure we were aware of their processes and the personalities of the characters and the world and how it worked, and how we wanted to make sure that they were the guardians of their experience and that we were invited there.
Well, kudos to the entire team. They did a wonderful job.
I'll pass it on.
Thank you. Was it always the plan to bring back Cassandra, or was this influenced by her enduring popularity among players?
She is very popular. Well, the thing that's fascinating with the AC brand is that the heroes and even the secondary characters are alive in a way even after the game releases, either through additional content or through transmedia. Of course, I cannot speak to for what they envision, but seeing as she was integrated in AC Rebellion and and seeing as there are other things planned in AC in general, um, we were just an addition to that. But it was true that for the team, it was important somehow to bring back the spotlight on her journey and the turmoil she has to go through. It was important for us to remind players that we have this character that we introduced in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and if you finished, she has something very particular about her that was new in the brand, and somehow showcase that there are many new things that can come out of it. So that was our motivation, and hopefully the achievement will have been unlocked.
For the players out there who haven't played Odyssey and who are not familiar with the end of the game, where would you say this new story fits?
So before I answer that, so we did the spoiler flag. Do you want to do one more? I'm going to be very light, but I still want to make sure I'm not disappointing anyone who's hearing what I'm going to answer.
I think everyone is always curious about if there's kind of like this internal sort of idea of canon. So that's really kind of what we're thinking about. But I think it's also just for anyone who hasn't had the chance to maybe play through Odyssey at all, or
Okay.
maybe hasn't gone through all the DLC. Where does the story fit in terms of the content out there?
So the the ambition of the crossovers content in Odyssey was that the story of those who are treasured happens months after the events of Odyssey, including the DLC, but you don't need to have completed them to understand. It gives you a bit more of layer of understanding, but it was a prerequisite to play it. And so we find a Cassandra who, even besides the DLC content, has been through a lot at the end of Odyssey, family-wise, experience-wise. Her eyes have been opened to quite a lot, and in particular, she ends up with an Isu artifact called the Staff of Trismegistus that empowers her with immortality. And so we pick up a little bit after that where we wanted to show her, because we show in general people accepting immortality and the role they have to take, but we wanted to show a little bit of the struggle that represents when you have that responsibility on your shoulders, because she at the end of Odyssey is given this task to wait out through time in order to meet the heir of memories. which is Layla. And at the end of Odyssey, we see Layla and Cassandra meet, and Cassandra passes on the Staff of Hermes to her and subsequently dies. So we know that Cassandra has lived a very long life and that she's been outside because she has a magnificent suit. But it was an opportunity to give a glimpse of what happened to her at the end of Odyssey.
So it may be recommended that you are able to start the mission even if you haven't reached the end of the game, as I understand. But maybe, like, for the sake of spoiling the end story for yourself, if you haven't experienced the main game, it might be wise to wait with the mission, would you say?
Yeah, that's definitely what we recommend. That's why when you start your experience and you go talk to the quest giver in Sami on the north part of the Isle of Kefalonia, you have two spoiler flags because you want to make sure that you really are sure with before starting. But it was also in a sense that it's been 3 years. Players may have heard about the story. They may have talked about it with friends. They may have picked it up in fan fiction or online, and they have been maybe informed of what she becomes, and necessarily don't want to go to the end of the game, but still are aware and they don't mind and they want to know what happens next. But we do recommend, if you want to live through the whole experience, to finish the 3 story arcs of Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And then play the experience. And on top of that, there are the Lost Tales of Greece of Barnabas and Herodotus that we recommend. And of course, if you have the post-launch content or the season pass, I mean, the DLCs are an even deeper level of depth of understanding of her story. But you can still understand and play the crossover stories without having played the DLCs. It was a very interesting balance, narrative-wise, to make sure that if you know, and if you don't know, you still understand. If you still wanted to start the content.
I will just put out there that to me it felt like a real true ending to the story. Like it felt like a really kind of lovely send off for Odyssey. I've played all of the content, so for me, I greatly enjoyed it.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad that's what it was understood, because that was also something we were trying to achieve in her story. We wanted to close Odyssey, but kickstart something new for her. But she needed to close her story in ancient Greece at that time in order to have a clean start, like a new motivation. And so I'm happy that's what you understood.
That's a sentiment that I've heard echoed among many fans, is that it feels like all these threads that were set up during the story really were tied together. It feels like a proper ending and the beginning of something new. So I think you guys really succeeded in that.
Thank you.
From here on out, there may be some spoilers for Cassandra's story. So if you haven't played the Valhalla crossover yet, you may want to pause here and go play it. The story of Cassandra, or the way Odyssey ends with the crossover story on that side, it sort of directly continues in Valhalla, and that's why there may be some spoilers. So if everybody's ready, let's continue with the Valhalla side.
Let's do.
So can you tell us about the inspiration for the Eivor and Cassandra crossover in AC Valhalla?
So with this new content, this concept of Assassin's Creed crossover stories, do you mean why we chose those 2 games and subsequently those 2 heroes?
Yeah.
Okay. So when we had this concept of bridging 2 existing games, and it was going to be led by Ubisoft Quebec, we decided to go with Odyssey because it was led by Ubisoft Quebec, and we were very familiar with those heroes. But as I said before, it was also an opportunity to go back to a character that could make that bridge, make the link between those 2 games, because there are quite some years in between. But as you know, it's possible with that character, and so the question first started with okay, so what is the question you wanted to answer? Why would players would want to go back to Odyssey? And the question became, well, what does Cassandra do after she becomes immortal? That was our drive. We wanted to answer that question. And so we had ideas started to pop, and then we know that Valhalla was the current game out and continue to live, of course. And we thought it was, well, something can be bridged there. And especially if you think, well, if Cassandra is immortal and Cassandra is alive at that time, we can answer the question, what happens when two AC protagonists meet? And when they meet, we meant not one was an illusion or not one was dead. It happened in the past, like for example, Aveline and Connor, or in some cinematic moments. What happened with Shay and Arno, for example. But this was a full-fledged experience based on these two encounters. That was the basis of crossover stories having. The crossover stories are here to bridge two existing games narratively. And so when we had the question, what happens when two AC protagonists meet, we had ideas would just sprout. It's very fun because we have in the brand so many charismatic characters that it was too sweet not to delve into it directly. Because when you think of these two characters, on paper you could think they're very similar. They both had traumatic childhoods. They know how to fight. They're very charismatic. They're also hot-headed, and you think that could be, maybe that would be a little bit not dull, but maybe repetitive. But then you have to keep in mind that Cassandra is over 1,300 years older at that time. She's traveled. She's seen the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, and so she can appear mostly as like a master, or technically as she become a little bit wiser. And so you see this mentor-mentee approach of these two characters that could be interesting, but you have to keep into account that we don't necessarily explain what happened to Cassandra, what she's been through, but we do know that players would be playing Eivor, so they're meeting Cassandra as an NPC. So anyway, it was we can delve a little bit later into that, but that was just fascinating to think about. And so once we had that motivation to start going, it continued, and seeing as how somehow fans as well were wondering this. There are many questions on Reddit about an Assassin's Creed Odyssey 2 and, well, what happened to Cassandra, and seeing a lot of fan art with Cassandra and Eivor meeting as well. It was an opportunity also to take our approach to those questions.
Yeah, we saw the official Twitter retweet a lot of fan art around the time of the release. That was really cool. All these fan arts of Eivor and Cassandra interacting that were made before this crossover was started, or at least before we knew that it was in production.
But definitely. Sorry, I'll bounce a little bit on that, because the fact that they existed before and during production, but you were not aware, it allowed us to show that there was an interest. There was an ongoing interest, even 3 years after the launch of Odyssey, and that it was an ongoing curiosity and discussion and imaginations and theorizing among fans. And even if we were motivated by the idea, we did have an approach to be there for the fans. And because we couldn't communicate with you, it was all on will and trust. And so we used a lot of those content to fuel the motivation of the devs. We had this internal Teams channel called Random, and we would share all the theories, all the concept art, all the memes, all the humor and love the fans have for these two games and these two characters, that we just shared. And so we cataloged them in a way. We had the links and the names, and so it was easier, of course, to showcase them after launch. So unknowingly, you were working in the shadows for us.
Yeah, it was really cool seeing the devs show that kind of appreciation for the community by retweeting all those artworks.
Well, we worked all last year for you, and we couldn't wait to show the community. So it's nice to see that we were helping each other out. It's really nice to see.
So you hear that, fan artists? You should make art of the content you want to see.
Yeah, you never know.
So moving on, while players can choose to play as either Cassandra or Alexios in AC Odyssey, in Valhalla you made the creative decision to make Cassandra appear to Eivor. What made the team decide to stick with Cassandra?
So it's for the fact that Alexios will always exist in the realm of the Assassin's Creed Odyssey game. However, as a team, we made the creative decision that the only character that would continue her journey outside of Assassin's Creed Odyssey game was going to be Cassandra. And yeah, that's mainly it. It was a very easy decision, and everybody got on board really right from the start as it was presented.
Thank you. And I sound like I'm repeating myself a little bit, but what were some challenges involved in bringing these two characters together? And I guess this is a two-parter. What did you enjoy the most about the project?
So challenge, I really like to speak about challenges because they're not necessarily problems, because we had to think about these, and it's fun that I don't think challenges can be succeeded, but we achieved the challenge. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm trying to find my way because it can some of them be seen as negative, while I was very stimulating challenges.
You met the challenge.
Yeah, the challenge. One I do want to highlight was how they were going to interact, how they fought, especially in that first encounter scene, because what was going to be their expectations of meeting each other. Because, like I said before, as Eivor, you don't know who is this character. Well, you can know as a player, but Eivor doesn't know who is Cassandra. And so we wanted to have winks along the way in their dynamics, and we also wanted to make sure that the fight um, felt substantial in a way, like satisfying, because you have Cassandra who's traveled, so she has different um, learning and movement techniques, and she's also a lot in avoiding the attacks, whereas Eivor really wants to throw anything they have at her, and really wants to be confrontational. And as you see into the fight, Cassandra is having fun, and and you see Eivor getting a little bit like frustrated and wanting to go for the final blow with her hidden blade, and then Cassandra being surprised in seeing it, and getting even more intrigued by this character, and so that had to transpire in the fight. And uh, the animation director, the animation team, the mocap team, the actors and the stuntmen were simply amazing for that. So that was a challenge because we wanted to make sure that the weapons felt iconic, that the fight felt iconic. But one thing to keep in mind is that because this content was unlocked, came after the launch of the game, and was unlockable very early, seemingly early on, we needed to take into account all the fight moves that the players could have unlocked, but we still needed the character to feel powerful. Anyway, that was one of the challenges, definitely the fight, to make sure it was epic enough. And then, of course, the next challenges was about their whole relationship. How were they going to interact with each other? Were they going to work together? Those were really exciting questions to answer, and the team really came together in giving some ideas and making a field that they would interact in. For example, in opening a door, and in giving some hints in a way, and we needed to balance Eivor having all of the knowledge of the land, of the culture, of being able to use Odin's sight, whereas Cassandra couldn't use that, and so they needed to cooperate in a way and use Cassandra's knowledge of having done this for a long time. And but I would highly recommend, if you have an opportunity to discuss with Kate McMullen, who was the writer of the Assassin's Creed Valhalla content for the crossover stories, because she would have a lot to tell. But otherwise, yeah, it was the challenge was adding small details that highlighted their interactions, making sure we weren't too heavy on Odyssey Winx to make sure that the story could move forward. But yeah, the fun banter, the little animations, the little details, and the effects as well. And working with Melissanti again, and working with the actors for Barnabas and Naruto's, of course, but working with Cecily, and that was a challenge in a way because we did everything from work from home. We could only see them digitally, and for example, those two amazing actors couldn't meet, and they met in Valhalla in a way. I know there's been some interactions with Ubisoft News for them to interact on the content, and not a challenge, but following some comments I saw online, I do want to mention the the romantic tension between the two characters because they don't kiss, they don't have any physical or intimate relationship. But I do want to say that take the opportunity to say that well, that wasn't the story we wanted to tell between these two characters. But it was interesting and important for us to show that there can be romance and tension without physical, intimate interaction, and that was a great win for us. So a lot of a lot of challenges, but they were really rewarding, and I hope it brought up a fun dynamic between these two iconic characters. And so yeah, in a sense, we also enjoyed the challenges at the same time.
I really enjoyed the little touches like Cassandra having this inner glow when you view her with eagle vision. That was nice.
Yeah, the team really added some little love here and there to make sure everything tied up because sometimes you have ideas and you don't have the time to add them, but there are subtle things, very small things that you can't to show that all the layers and the levels of understanding are added. And I do have to say that actually adding Cassandra to the Valhalla game was a challenge in itself, and I'm happy we've succeeded.
You mean adding the model or?
Yep.
Okay, interesting. Can you tell us what was challenging about that?
Oh, it's just like I said in the beginning, different software updates, and so things evolve in 3 years. So we need to make sure that the texture was right, that the colors were right, that she was our good old Cassandra, but she had moved tech wise, and so there were some complications there to make sure that she did appear like our good old Cassandra, but the lighting and such they change and the tech changed from game to game, so that was a challenge there.
Right, that makes sense.
I was just gonna add that I feel like the team really nailed a lot of things. Like that initial fight between them felt so epic. Like I was just grinning the entire time.
Well, the one thing I do want to mention about that fight, the whole team's involved for the cinematics team, because it's a mix of a cinematic and a dialogue, but you can't see because it's smoothed in. And so the team in Quebec and the team in Montpellier and the mocap team did something amazing. When we recorded it, it was the animation and worked with the stuntman was fascinating. But then of course you have to wait for it to be slowly integrated into the game, and so you have to trust that it's still epic after seeing it for 200 times. And then when you start adding the music and sound effects, and then you have to think of the logic of how the weapons are going to they're going to work. You're going to feel the hit from each weapon. And I would, if I could, I would like to rewatch the scene with you because there are some subtle hints here and there that we added right as Eivor enters the clearing from the beginning of that cinematic. Because if you listen intently, there are some small strings that are strung that are the reminiscent of that are actually the theme from Odyssey. And so if you really paid attention from the beginning, you could hear that instrument play, and then it merges into the environment and the sound effects from that scene, and then you don't know that it's Cassandra. Actually, it is Ranvi's hair for that small shot. You see her from her back, from the side. It is definitely Ranvi's hair, and then for the next shot, change it for Cassandra to help play on that a little bit. But then when you don't know it's her, but when you don't know, I mean it's Cassandra, but when the camera is placed in a way where you have Eivor in the back and Cassandra in the front, and she slowly turns around, you see the Eagle Bearer bracer. So if you know, you could have known before she reveals herself as being Cassandra. And so we played with that a little bit, and that was really fun.
I love those little touches. That's so great.
Me too.
Yeah, we had to make sure she was placed correctly so that the camera could make it work. Sorry. A lot of fun.
One thing I'm curious about regarding that fight is, was it ever a consideration to turn it into like a real playable boss fight, or was it always like a cinematic? Like, what was behind that decision?
Well, we did think about it being a fight, but very early, almost immediately following some discussions, we wanted it to be a cinematic, because when you think about fighting Cassandra, she is immortal, so we don't want it to feel like a pain for the player to fight this character, and if we had, it would have meant to make sure she felt quite unique. What have been her fight moves? What are her characteristics? How would that arena work out? How do we take into account every level of Eivor? And so I brought up some questions, and we felt it wasn't the objective. Our objective of the story wasn't the fight; it was going to be their relationship following it. And so we also wanted to make sure that everybody lived the same level of epicness in that encounter. And so it was agreed very early on to have it as a cinematic.
Thank you for expanding on that.
Of course.
You mentioned the little musical cues when we see Cassandra for the first time, like the subtle thing in the background, and you kind of also use that in Odyssey. In the Odyssey part of the crossover, you hear the music from Origins when we see Cassandra in Egypt. And to kind of bridge over to that, to our next question, what can you tell us about Cassandra's hidden blade?
So I'm excited about this question because I don't think anybody's asked us, me or Pierre-Luc, details about it until now. And so what I really want to talk about Cassandra's hidden blade is about the design and the steps that it took. Because of course we had several intentions in the key elements of its design. So how it works is that we start with a creative brief, and we list ideas, and we also, I like to add also all the designs of the past hidden blades to keep in mind of a history and like a chronology, even though this would happen before most of the hidden blades that we're familiar with. And we also worked with Stefania Rueta, who's our in-house historian, who worked on Assassin's Creed Odyssey, because it was important to discuss practices at that time. If Cassandra were to build it in ancient Greece at that time, what were the ingredients, the metals, the knowledge and craftsmanship that would be known, so that it would help give character to the final design. And so we brought up a list of things to keep in mind, and then worked with our concept artist Gabriel Blanc, and he came up with several designs, and then we discussed the meaning of all of the elements, and we felt that from the start it was important and meaningful to reuse Cassandra's bracers, but we actually flipped them, because the bracer with the eagle bearer was on her right arm, and the more prominent one, the bronze gold one, was on the left. But Cassandra in Odyssey would use the broken spear in her left hand, but now that we were giving her a hidden blade, we felt that it would be on her blade arm, air quotes, sorry, and so we'd switch them. And so would keep the bracer with the eagle bearer, but put it on her left arm and have the hidden blade inside. And so we made that switch, and because yes, the eagle bearer design is very iconic to her and how she was named, and so we felt that it was part of her history that she wanted to acknowledge through time. And we also added some subtle Isu lines, Isu markings, to kind of reminisce of her mission that she's given, or she accepts at the end of the experience. And the blade design itself was suggested by Gabriel to hint at the Kopis sword, which is very iconic to ancient Greece. And so there are subtle hints here and there. And very early on, Gabriel suggested adding as a very prominent part of the blade was the Medusa head. And when we saw that overall effect, it was just hypnotizing, and we fell in love with it. And so you can see, well, why? Because Medusa is a strong woman and a strong character from identifiable to that period, iconic to Greece, and also as a character, she was in the shadows herself. She was very secluded. She was misunderstood, and so there was a lot of um, uh, iconography that also related to Cassandra, and thought that fit very well. And you can also see some nods to her very iconic armor from the red chlamyde that she had as a hood in Odyssey, with the red uh, cloth that's around the weapon. And so in some way, when I was talking about materials, we wanted to show that there was some wear in the weapon, in the bracer and the blade itself, because she would have used it over time. But it was important also to make sure we could use some materials that she could find anywhere through time, because she would have been a nod to it having passed through time, and that she could have repaired it over time. And so those are a few details on how we designed the hidden blade. Hope it gives you a little bit more insight.
Yeah, I love all those little details, and I also noticed the Medusa. It was really nice to, like you said, all these reasons that it's not just like the typical, because she's an enemy, but because of the personal story that we saw in Odyssey.
Yeah, because of the heartache and the gracefulness that character represents as well. Yeah, definitely, she's very misunderstood even in her myth. So it's nice to help break maybe the mainstream understanding of who that character is.
Can you maybe tell us anything about when she might have acquired the hidden blade? Or is that something?
It's true that we're very evasive, and I don't know if we want to say too much now, but we do hint at the end of the Odyssey crossover content, that crossover story, content, that she is intrigued to go to Egypt, because she might have heard about that country in the past, and Herodotus lived there, so he has a lot to say. That's why he actually says that at the end. But we need to keep in mind that technically Cassandra doesn't know who else is there. Um, Talking about Darius. But it was also a wink that if she were to go to Egypt, she would meet Darius. And if you played the first DLC, you would know that Darius was a proto-assassin and that he wielded a hidden blade. And so there was a lot of layers, um, in a way, of understanding that someone definitely in Egypt could help her build something, but if she built it then or took the knowledge later on, that's something we'll keep for us for now. But there was definitely someone who could help her understand how that worked. But in that final sequence, there was a lot of not subtle, definitely subtle hints, but there was a lot of layers of meaning, especially in that final scene as well.
What has been the player response to the new content? Have you enjoyed watching people's reactions?
The player's response was heartwarmingly positive on either social media platform, YouTube, Reddit, Insta, Twitter, Tumblr, etc., etc. I even saw some fan fiction stories. I haven't had the opportunity to read yet, but I'm on vacation soon, so I'll try to read those. But yeah, we enjoys the people's reaction when the trailer was announced, seeing some live reactions or seeing some videos of those reactions, and seeing people play online, and seeing the new memes, the new screenshots, the new art, the new ideas, theories. It was fascinating to see that there was still a spark, but that reignited the pre-existing fire. Like it gave life back to all those theories. And we definitely watched them, and we shared what we could find on that team's thread I was talking to you about, because it was important to show the glee and the excitement that it generated. And yeah, it's important to show the dev team, because this is how the community interacts, to show how meaningful their work is. that it's not just, well, work is done and then the game is launched into the world and it's never not. Sorry, what I mean is that when a game launches, whichever it is, we sometimes feel like it launched and then it's over, but that game is going to exist for the rest of time. So it's nice to keep up with the community like we did for this content, see everybody react. So it was really amazing, and I like to snoop sometimes, to continue snooping online and to see um, what is said, because you learn so much, and it's also funny because during the year when we worked on this, I couldn't necessarily interact with or like content that was related to us. I would just share the link and do some screenshots, because I didn't want to be too obvious, of the theories and ideas. But I did allow myself to comment or like some Cassandra content because I've always been a fan of those ever since Odyssey launched. So that was a bit easy. But I know that the community is also very eagle-eyed or lynx-eyed, so I need to be careful.
You're not wrong about that, so that was probably a very safe strategy. And we're to our last question. I don't know how much you can say about this, but are there plans for more crossovers in the future?
Well, there's something I definitely want to say is that the this crossover content was an exceptional opportunity, and we really had so much fun. But as you know, yeah, we can't speak about the future of the brand. But thank you for the outpour of love, though.
So fans, if you have any crossover content to share, you know who to send it to now.
Yes, I'd be delighted. But it does open so many questions. That's what's amazing about it. So we'll see if there's an opportunity for them to get answered.
Yeah, like I said earlier, the reaction in the AC Sisterhood has been very positive, and I'm sure we'd love to see more stories like this in the future.
Well, well, that was the thing because when you look at the AC brand, the game spanned, and the transmedia content, of course, spanned the Earth's real timeline in some way, and they're all connected through characters, through lore, through motivations, through similar eras, and sometimes I think it's something easy to forget because we move on to each piece of content, very anchored in their setting and their location, but they're all connected, and so it was nice to take an opportunity just to remind us of that as well.
And Cassandra is certainly a character who lends herself
Yeah,
to a lot of story potential.
but that's why, yeah, that's why also it made sense to do this content between Odyssey and Valhalla. It's because she, until proven otherwise, she was in the timeline. She happens before the rest of the content, and she really could have seen definitely a lot. And so that's why it's an interesting character to remind herself that she could have lived so many different lives. She could have been through so many life crises. She could have witnessed so many things, built things, destroyed things. That's why sometimes it's a bit daunting to have well, an immortal or at least or 2,000 years character. But there are some interesting dynamics and stories that could be told, and that's why I wanted to bring the spotlight back on this character to remind everyone that there's so much that can be done. So hopefully we'll see what happens next. But just to be clear that crossover content or the crossover stories are not um, dedicated to Cassandra. They're dedicated to how we can bridge all of the games. But I appreciate the love for this character because we love her too.
And I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. But thank you very much for joining us, Clemence.
It was my pleasure.
And thank you for helping to bring these crossover stories to the community. They've been very much appreciated.
Yeah, it's quite a thing to be able to say to the whole team that even with a small experience as this, I say small compared to the main games, respective main games, that we narratively brought an experience that adds our own little stone to. Sorry, I think I'm mixing up a French expression, but we're part of this monument that is AC, and we brought something even minute to it. So it's quite rewarding when you see how many amazing devs have worked on it and the legacy it has.
And especially, like we talked about earlier, that Odyssey is this older game and it's getting still like this new content because it's a beloved game for many people.
Yeah, definitely. It's not because a game or a story has been told in the past that it's not relevant to the brand today. So yeah, I can't wait to definitely see what happens next.
So thank you, and thank you, Lorena.
Happy to be here.
Yes, thank you to both.
Join us again next time on AC Sisterhood Speaks, and have a good week.